Hey everyone, welcome to week 3. You join me again in my office, as I always am when I make these videos. This week we're talking a little bit about moving from the first bits of things that we did for the assignment to some more details for that assignment. And I'll explain a little bit about why I'm assigning some of the things that I am assigning in the first few weeks of this class. You should have turned in your idea planner, and I am commenting on that as we speak. Well, not literally as we speak. Literally as I speak, I'm speaking to you here. But I should have comments back to you early in week 3. I'm not turning down anybody's ideas, of course. I think my goal here is to provide useful feedback for you so you can pursue these ideas on the way toward that first essay project. And the other things that we'll emphasize that I'm seeing as our next steps of the process, I'll also try to foreshadow a little bit in my comments, so you're not surprised by something that you're about to do next and you didn't get some feedback on that earlier on. So it'll be my best advice for your project based on what you fill out in that idea planner, and of course getting points for the discussion board posts too. So this week, because this is a really good week to get some writing done and to work on that feedback from that idea planner, really we have primarily 2 discussion board posts, and those discussion board posts have to do with a main feature of this assignment, which is definition, in that you kind of have to do some definitional work in order to make this essay happen. So we're well on the way to our first assignment. I also did want to mention just briefly before I start talking about definition, the reason why I assign some of the things I assign, like the idea planner, is partially because the way we know that writing happens best is that when you don't, I have a colleague who calls it binge writing as opposed to binge drinking. And I think it works really well in this context, in that binge writing is bad. If you save all your writing up for when something's due, it probably won't be very good writing. But if what your goal is to write portions of that piece and get some feedback on the way, you're going to be more assured to have a better piece of writing in the end. And ultimately, I'm not grading to be punishing and to say, like, you did a bad job on this, here's why you got this grade. I want you to succeed in all the assignments on the way towards turning something in. So if you do some of the small portions of writing assignments and then you turn something in based on the confidence of those earlier pieces, or by maybe revising your ideas from those earlier pieces, it will be better in the end. We kind of focus on that as like writing is process, not product. Ultimately, we do have to grade some product in the end, but we want to emphasize that good writing happens in a process, not just all at once at the very end. So that's kind of why I assign some of these midway point pieces, like the idea planner. And the discussion board posts, too. Okay, so focusing on definition this week. We're going to focus on understanding first how some of the authors in our sustainability reader have generated definitions. And there's definitional parts to a lot of the different arguments, even though they're not totally taken over by a definition. Like the entire essay isn't a definition, and that's going to be true for you too. But definition is a key portion to it, because you have to get people to at least acknowledge and somewhat tacitly agree to your definition to kind of move on in that process of reading your essay. And definitions are really key for generating, I wouldn't call it agreement, I would call it what we, people in my field would call stasis, in that we agree to the basic terms of an argument before we can then have the discussion about the thing that we want to have a discussion about. So you need to define sustainability for your particular context before you can then offer some opinions about sustainability in that context. And if people read that definition first, they're more likely to then engage in that discussion with you. They've reached what we would call stasis, which means we all agree on the same sort of major things, the basic things, and then we can have a discussion from there. So that's what we're really aiming for. So we're going to look at how 2 different authors have generated some definitional components. And I'm not telling you what I want you to look at, what definitions I want you to look at. I want you to just be all ears for any kind of definitional work that's happening in these 2 essays. There's no right answers to this either. So your responses are really about, can you tune yourself in to how are they doing any kind of definitional work? And that's one discussion board post. The other one was really about, what's your definition? Have you found a good source for that definition in your context yet? And if not, how are you trying to make a definition about sustainability fit your context? And I think that's really key. And that'll play a big part in your essay. It's funny, I was having a conversation with somebody who does fabric design in terms of like fabric engineering, and she was saying for her, the definition of sustainability in terms of fabric generation comes from the idea of, and I hadn't thought of this before, basically it's a similar idea to that of a watershed, in that she calls it a fabric shed, in that where are the component parts to how you make cloth, how you make material. So she was saying, well, I want my sheep to come from somewhere regional, somewhere local to me, so I know where that's coming from. I want the water that I wind up using in the process to be local. So she has a very different definition of sustainability, but she, first off in that conversation, talked about that, and I was like, oh, I'm on board with this. I'm really interested in understanding how your idea of a fabric shed makes sense to how you understand how you make fabric locally. So that's just one example, but you'll have lots of different things. So that's the other portion. And I also want you to sort of pull that definition in. Cutting and pasting is fine, but also say, why do you like this definition? Why is it usable? And how you're going to use it in your essay. Just some heads up. These are not promises. These are your best guesses as of now as to how you're going to use it. There's also another chapter that I'm having you read this week from our textbooks, from our PDF textbooks, about critical thinking. And that one, there's no discussion board attached to. I just want you to read it. We're doing good critical thinking in this essay, ideally. So this sort of sets us up to at least jump into that mindset of like, here's what we should be aiming for doing good critical thinking. But there's no discussion board for it, so you don't have to write anything about that. I just want you to look at that essay, or that chapter. And then finally, the last thing, and I have two screens here, so I'm looking at what we're up to this week as well. There's also a document that I've put together that sort of outlines the many reasons why we do definitional work, and then how we wind up doing some of that definitional work with super short examples, right? Now your examples and your definitions are going to be longer than the very short examples that I'm offering here, but it gives you some background as to why we're doing that definitional work, so we can convey useful information, we can explain our perspective, we can demonstrate that we understand meaning, we can entertain, and we should entertain a little bit, right? We can argue from that definition too. And then there's no right way to build a definition, but there's lots of different strategies. So you can make, if it's useful, take a look at that document first before you do that discussion board post that sort of reflects on your particular definition of sustainability and how you're making sense of it, or might be making sense of it in your essay. So that's what we're up to this week. Hopefully I'll have those idea planners back to you early in week 3 so you can make use of them. The actual essay isn't due for a little bit yet, so there's no pressure. I mentioned before, we're having a slow build for the first 5 weeks, and then we'll have 2 essays that follow after that. Not in rapid succession, but those essays will happen in 2 or 3 weeks rather than 4 to 5 weeks. So things will pick up, but I like the slow build up to sort of say, this class has some basic things that we need to get down before we can kind of just start generating more writing. Okay? All right, I'll see you in week 4.